The call came at 7:23 p.m. on a Tuesday while I was reviewing quarterly reports from my investment portfolio in my downtown Seattle office. I was celebrating a particularly good day. My biotech holdings had just announced breakthrough clinical trial results, pushing my net worth past the $340 million mark for the first time. "Carmen, we need to talk." My brother Diego's voice was sharp with that familiar authority he'd used since we were kids, when he'd decided who got to play with which toys or who had to do extra chores. "What's up, Diego?" "Mom's getting too old to handle her finances. Jessica and I have decided to take over her accounts, her car, everything. We're picking up her credit cards tomorrow morning." I set down my pen and gave him my full attention. "Mom's 72 and sharp as a tack. What makes you think she can't handle her own finances?" "Carmen, be realistic. She's living in that big house by herself, driving that expensive car, spending money on things she doesn't need. Someone responsible needs to step in before she makes bad decisions." "Someone responsible like you?" "Like Jessica and me, yes. We have families to think about, kids to put through college. Mom's estate should be preserved for the people who'll actually benefit from it." The casual assumption in his voice, that he and Jessica were the rightful heirs to Mom's wealth while I was just some peripheral family member, was breathtaking in its arrogance. "What about Mom's opinion on this?" "Mom doesn't get a vote. We've already consulted with a lawyer about conservatorship proceedings. Her spending has been erratic and we have documentation." "What kind of documentation?" "She spent $15,000 on a kitchen renovation last month. She bought a new car in June. She's been taking expensive trips to Europe and Asia. It's clearly irresponsible behavior for someone her age." I almost laughed. Mom's erratic spending was actually her enjoying the comfortable retirement she'd earned after 30 years as a high school principal. The kitchen renovation was something she'd wanted for decades. The car was a sensible Honda that replaced her 15-year-old sedan. And the trips to Europe and Asia were bucket-list adventures she'd been planning since Dad died 5 years ago. "And where do I fit into this plan?" "You don't really. You can walk. Take the bus. Figure it out. You're 34, Carmen. It's time you started taking care of yourself instead of relying on Mom for everything." The irony was staggering. Diego thought I was the family member who relied on Mom financially, when the reality was exactly the opposite. "Diego, before you take over Mom's accounts, you might want to check your own bank account first." "Why would I do that?" I pulled up my investment management platform on my computer, scrolling through the automated transfer records that had been running for 3 years. "Because the $2.3 million you and Jessica have been spending over the past 3 years? It's been coming from my investment fund, not Mom's retirement savings." There was a long pause. "That's impossible, Carmen. We pay our own bills." "Do you?" "Let me read you some transaction records. March 15th. $4,200 transferred to cover Jessica's credit card payment. April 22nd. $12,000 for Emma's private school tuition. May 8th. $3,800 for your car payment and insurance. June 14th, $8,500 for your mortgage payment." I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "Where are you getting these numbers?" "From my accountant who's been managing the financial support I've been providing to keep your family afloat for the past 3 years." The truth was more complicated than Diego knew. 3 years ago, when he'd lost his job in pharmaceutical sales and Jessica's marketing consulting business had collapsed during the pandemic, they'd come to Mom for help. She'd agreed to assist with their mortgage payments and Emma's school tuition, but she'd come to me privately with concerns about depleting her retirement savings. "Carmen," she'd said during one of our monthly dinners, "I want to help Diego and Jessica, but I'm worried about my own financial security. Your father and I saved carefully, but we didn't plan for supporting adult children indefinitely. So I'd set up a system where I covered Diego and Jessica's major expenses through anonymous transfers, while Mom got credit for the generosity. It had seemed like an elegant solution. Mom could maintain her relationship with Diego without sacrificing her retirement security, and Diego and Jessica could get the help they needed without the humiliation of accepting charity from their younger sister. The problem was that Diego had never bothered to ask where the money was actually coming from. He just assumed that Mom was wealthy enough to cover his family's expenses indefinitely, and he'd started making financial decisions based on that assumption. "You're lying," Diego said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Am I? What's your current bank balance, Diego? Another pause. I could hear him typing, probably logging into his online banking. I have $847 in checking. And your savings account? Carmen, that's none of your business. Diego, your savings account has $23. Your credit cards are maxed out at $47,000. Your mortgage is 3 months behind. The only reason you haven't been foreclosed on is because I've been covering your payments through a third-party service. The silence stretched on for nearly a minute. Why would you do that? Because Mom asked me to help and I didn't want to see Emma lose her home or her school. But you just told me you're planning to take over Mom's finances to preserve the estate for people who'll actually benefit from it. So I'm withdrawing my support. I pulled up the automated transfer system and started canceling payments. Carmen, wait. You can't just. At midnight tonight, every automated payment I've been making on your behalf will be canceled. Your mortgage company will receive notice that the payment plan is terminated. Emma's school will be informed that tuition support has ended. Your car loan company will resume normal collection procedures. Carmen, please. We can work something out. We could have worked something out 3 years ago if you'd been honest about your situation and grateful for the help you were receiving. Instead, you decided that Mom was your personal aim and I was a burden to be discarded. I could hear Jessica in the background asking what was happening. Diego was explaining in a panicked whisper that somehow Carmen had been paying their bills. How? Jessica's voice came through clearly. Carmen doesn't have that kind of money. She works at some tech company. I didn't work at some tech company. I was the founder and CEO of Rodriguez Capital Management, a quantitative investment firm that managed $2.4 billion in assets for institutional clients. I'd started the company 8 years ago with $50,000 in seed money and a proprietary algorithm for identifying undervalued biotech stocks. Through a combination of careful research, strategic timing, and honestly good luck, I'd built it into one of the most successful boutique investment firms on the West Coast. But I'd kept a low profile about my success. Partly for security reasons. Managing that much money made you a target for lawsuits and worse. Partly for family reasons. I'd seen what happened to other wealthy people when their relatives discovered their net worth. I drove a modest Toyota, lived in a nice but not ostentatious condo, and dressed like any other Seattle professional. My family assumed I was doing well enough but not spectacularly well. They had no idea that I could have bought and sold their entire social circle without affecting my lifestyle. Jessica, I'm going to explain this once, I said, putting the call on speaker. I founded Rodriguez Capital Management in 2016. We managed $2.4 billion in institutional investments. My personal net worth is approximately $340 million. For the past 3 years, I've been anonymously funding your family's lifestyle through automated transfers totaling $2.3 million. The silence was deafening. $340 million? Jessica whispered. That's the current valuation, yes. It fluctuates with market conditions, but that's the approximate number. And you've been paying our bills? Your mortgage, Emma's tuition, Diego's car payments, your credit card minimums, your health insurance premiums, your property taxes, essentially everything that kept your family financially stable. Diego's voice was barely audible. Why didn't you tell us? Because every time I tried to discuss family finances, you changed the subject or told me not to worry about things I didn't understand. You made it clear that you saw me as the little sister who needed to stay out of adult conversations. The truth was that I'd tried multiple times to have honest conversations about money with Diego and Jessica. When Diego had lost his job, I'd offered to help him find a new position through my professional network. When Jessica's business was struggling, I'd suggested marketing strategies that worked for my other clients. But they dismissed my advice as naive or irrelevant, preferring to maintain the fiction that they were just going through a temporary rough patch. Carmen, Diego said, we need to talk about this in person. This is too important for a phone conversation. No, Diego. This conversation is over. You made your position clear. You think I'm someone who can be discarded when convenient, and you think Mom is someone whose assets you can claim for your own benefit. I disagree with both assumptions. But Emma's school. Emma can attend public school like most kids her age. You can sell the house and buy something you can actually afford. Jessica can find a job that provides health insurance. You can live within your means instead of living off money you thought was coming from mom's retirement fund. I could hear Jessica crying in the background. Carmen, please. We didn't know. If we'd known it was your money. You would have what? Been grateful? Treated me with respect? Included me in family decisions? Yes. Of course. Jessica, 30 minutes ago Diego told me I could walk and take the bus because it was time I started taking care of myself instead of relying on mom. He had no idea that I'd been taking care of his entire family for 3 years. The irony was that I'd been hoping for exactly this kind of honesty from them. If they'd come to me directly and said, Carmen, we're struggling financially and need help, I would have been happy to assist them openly. I might have offered Diego a position at my firm, or helped Jessica rebuild her consulting business with introductions to potential clients. Instead, they'd maintain the pretense that they were financially independent while secretly depending on support they thought was coming from mom. And when they decided that mom's resources should be redirected to benefit them more directly, they'd been perfectly willing to cut me out entirely. What happens now? Diego asked. Now you figure out how to support your family without depending on money that isn't yours. Now you have an honest conversation with mom about your financial situation instead of plotting to take over her accounts. Now you decide whether you want a relationship with me based on who I actually am instead of who you assumed I was. I hung up and sat back in my chair, looking out at the Seattle skyline through my office windows. The city lights twinkled below like stars, and Elliott Bay stretched out toward the Olympic Mountains in the distance. It was a beautiful view, one I'd earned through years of careful planning and strategic thinking. My phone buzzed with a text from mom. Carmen, Diego just called me in tears. He says you've been supporting his family financially? Is this true? I called her back immediately. Hi, Mom. Carmen, honey, what's going on? Diego is saying impossible things about you having hundreds of millions of dollars and paying his mortgage. It's not impossible, Mom. It's just not something I advertise. I spent the next hour explaining my business, my success, and the financial arrangements I'd made to help Diego and Jessica while protecting Mom's retirement security. She listened without interrupting, asking thoughtful questions about investment strategies and business operations. Carmen, she said finally, I'm proud of what you've accomplished. But I'm also confused about why you felt you needed to hide it from us. Because I wanted to be treated like family, not like a bank account. I wanted relationships based on love and respect, not on what I could provide financially. And you thought we'd treat you differently if we knew about your success? Mom, Diego just spent 20 minutes explaining why I should be cut out of family financial decisions because I'm irresponsible and dependent. He had no idea that I'd been subsidizing his lifestyle for 3 years. She was quiet for a long time. You're right, she said finally. We made assumptions about you that weren't fair or accurate. We treated you like the little sister who needed guidance instead of the successful adult you'd become. I understand why it happened. I kept a low profile, drove an ordinary car, lived modestly. But I hoped that eventually you'd ask questions about my life, my work, my goals. Instead, you just assumed I was getting by and left it at that. What happens with Diego and Jessica now? That depends on them. I'm not going to continue funding their lifestyle while they plot to take over your finances. But if they can acknowledge what actually happened and approach this situation honestly, we might be able to work something out. Over the next few days, Diego and Jessica went through what could only be described as financial withdrawal. Without my anonymous support, they had to face the reality of their situation. The mortgage company started foreclosure proceedings. Emma's private school sent tuition notices. Credit card companies began calling. But something interesting happened during that process. Instead of panicking or making demands, Diego and Jessica started making realistic plans. Diego applied for jobs in medical device sales, using contacts from his previous career. Jessica reached out to former clients about freelance marketing projects. They put their house on the market and started looking at smaller homes in less expensive neighborhoods. Most importantly, they had honest conversations with Mom about their financial situation and asked for reasonable, temporary assistance while they got back on their feet. A week after our phone call, Diego came to my office. He looked tired and stressed, but also more grounded than I'd seen him in years. Carmen, I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. I'm listening. First, I'm sorry for assuming you were financially dependent on Mom. You were right. I never bothered to ask about your work or your life. I just made assumptions based on the car you drove and the way you dressed. He sat down across from my desk, looking around the office with obvious amazement. Rodriguez Capital Management occupied the entire 47th floor of a downtown high-rise, with panoramic views of the city and Puget Sound. Second, I'm sorry for trying to cut you out of family decisions. You're not just my little sister anymore. You're a successful businesswoman who's been more financially responsible than Jessica and I have been. And third, I'm sorry for taking your help for granted. I should have questioned where the money was coming from. I should have been grateful instead of entitled. And I should have included you in conversations about Mom's finances instead of treating you like an obstacle. I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. Diego, do you understand what would have happened if you'd succeeded in taking over Mom's accounts? You would have stopped supporting us financially. More than that, you would have discovered that Mom's retirement savings aren't nearly as large as you thought. The comfortable lifestyle she's been maintaining? That's partly because I've been covering major expenses like home maintenance, medical bills, and travel costs. If you'd taken control of her accounts, you would have found maybe $180,000 in actual savings. His face went pale. But she seems so financially secure. Because I've been ensuring that she is financially secure. The same way I ensured that you were financially secure, until you decided I was disposable. Diego was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. Carmen, is there any chance we could start over? Not with the financial support. Jessica and I need to learn to stand on our own feet. But with the family relationship. What would that look like? It would look like treating you with the respect you deserve. Including you in family decisions. Asking your advice about important matters. Actually caring about your life and your success. And it would look like honesty about your financial situation instead of pretending you're independent while depending on support you thought was coming from Mom. Yes. Complete honesty. I considered his proposal. The truth was that I wanted to have a real relationship with my brother. One based on mutual respect rather than the childhood dynamics we'd never outgrown. But it would require fundamental changes in how we related to each other. Diego, I'm willing to try. But there are conditions. Name them. First, no more assumptions about my capabilities or my role in the family. If you want to know something about my life or my business, ask directly. Agreed. Second, no more financial secrecy. If you need help, ask for it openly. If you can't afford something, say so. If you're struggling, let's work together to find solutions. Agreed. Third, Mom's financial security is non-negotiable. I will continue to ensure that she can maintain her lifestyle and her independence. Any family financial planning has to start with that assumption. Understood. And fourth, Emma's education is important to me. I'm willing to help with tuition costs, but through a transparent arrangement where everyone understands the terms. Diego's eyes filled with tears. Carmen, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me in a year if we've managed to build a better relationship. 6 months later, Diego had found a new job in biotech sales that paid well enough to cover their basic expenses. Jessica had rebuilt her consulting practice and was generating steady income from 3 major clients. They'd moved to a smaller house that they could afford without assistance. And Emma had transitioned to a highly rated public school where she was thriving academically and socially. More importantly, our family dynamics had fundamentally changed. Diego started calling me for business advice, having learned that his little sister actually knew something about strategic planning and financial management. Jessica asked me to review marketing proposals for her consulting clients. Mom began including me in conversations about her long-term financial planning and estate arrangements. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like a full member of the family rather than someone they tolerated or dismissed. The phone call that had started with, "You can walk," had ended with all of us learning to walk together as equals. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do for someone is to stop giving them what they think they want and start giving them what they actually need. In Diego and Jessica's case, what they needed wasn't more money. It was the opportunity to stand on their own feet, make their own decisions, and build genuine relationships based on honesty rather than hidden dependencies. And what I needed wasn't to be the secret benefactor who solved everyone's problems from the shadows. I needed to be recognized for who I really was, not just as the little sister but as a successful businesswoman, a strategic thinker, and a family member whose opinions and contributions mattered. The midnight deadline that had seemed like an ultimatum had actually been a new beginning.